The floorboard above me creaked, sending my heart racing. I paused, the remote suspended mid-air, caught in the act of my unexpected nibbling. They're always making noises, aren't they? As I settled into the soft glow of the television, my senses heightened, I caught it once more. A distinct sound, a dragging noise, as if someone was attempting to move quietly but stumbling in the effort. My parents are away on their weekend getaway and won't be back until tomorrow night. This house was meant to be my sanctuary of solitude. I muted the television, my gaze drifting upward to the ceiling. The stillness was overwhelming, shattered solely by the pounding of my heart echoing in my ears, followed by a gentle thud as if something had toppled over. "Hello," I called with a voice that trembled with embarrassment. Silence, naturally. What was I anticipating? If an intruder were to appear, I wouldn't be caught off guard. With a gentle resolve, I picked up my phone, my fingers quivering slightly as I dialed my father's number, yet I found myself pausing before making the call. What if it turned out to be nothing at all? I would feel like a fool if I spoiled her long-awaited vacation over a mere sound in the attic or my overactive imagination. Another creak, this time echoing in the hallway, near the top of the stairs by the door. I pressed the phone to my ear, my gaze fixed on the shadowy staircase in view from my place on the couch. One doorbell, 2 rings. My father's upbeat voicemail struck me like a blow to the gut. They were likely enjoying a meal at that upscale restaurant where the signal is non-existent. I hung up and quickly dialed 911. My rapid, shallow breaths when the operator picked up were interrupted by a sound that sent chills down my spine. The unmistakable creak of a hinge, the old door to my parents' bedroom that my father always promised to oil. What seems to be the emergency? I tried to speak, but silence enveloped me. My gaze was locked on the top of the stairs, where a shadow had just emerged. "Hello, is anyone there?" I managed to find my voice, barely more than a whisper. "There's an unexpected guest in my home." A shadow glided down the first step. In the soft glow of the television, she caught sight of metal resting in her hand. "Could you please share your address, miss?" The figure ascended the stairs, taking deliberate and careful steps. I had yet to catch a glimpse of myself nestled in the corner of the couch. However, I had no option but to navigate the stairs to reach the door. I didn't murmur into the phone. It's positioned between the exit, and I'm situated in the living room. All right, take a deep breath. Seek out a safe spot to conceal yourself if possible. Stay on the line. Conceal yourself. I scanned the surroundings. As I surveyed the room, I looked for a potential refuge. The coat closet was too conspicuous beneath the sofa, the window seemed incompatible, yet perhaps it could work. The floorboard at the base of the stairs let out a familiar creak. I shifted my focus back to the intruder, now clearly outlined in the soft glow of the dim light. A tall, slender figure cloaked in black loomed, gripping what seemed to be a sizable knife in his right hand. Time appeared to stretch, and I could sense its passage. My heart thumped powerfully in my ears, while the man's head pivoted, surveying the room. In any instant, I could find myself engulfed in that overwhelming sense of fear. Last summer, a vivid memory surfaced, playing a unique game of hide-and-seek with my cousins. It was the kind of game that led me to victory, driven by pure instinct. I maneuvered swiftly, phone still pressed to my ear, taking 3 quick steps to secure my win. I have reached the entertainment center. I pulled open the cabinet beneath the TV, where our collection of video games was stored. "What's happening?" The operator's voice crackled through the phone, obscuring my presence. I softly murmured and shifted my body to fit into the tight space, thankful for my petite frame. I shut the cabinet door softly, leaving it slightly open, and tuned in to the slow, measured footsteps resonating in the space. My lungs felt like they were on fire as I fought to steady my breath, gripped by fear that even the faintest noise could expose my presence. "The police will be here any moment," the operator said gently. "Please remain still." Then, without a sound, the footsteps came to an abrupt halt, only to resume, now drawing nearer. This time, I found myself sinking even further into the cabinet, the sharp contours of the Xbox pressing uncomfortably against my back and hand. It soared into my mouth, stifling a gasp as something collided with the entertainment center, creating a tense pause that felt like an eternity. He meticulously combed through the room. The only sounds breaking the silence were the rhythmic opening and closing of drawers. As I stood just outside, the crackle of a police radio reached my ears, accompanied by muffled voices, and then a sudden loud bang that startled me. The police burst through the door, and the sounds of hurried footsteps in the living room transformed into a frantic dash. The sound of the back door crashing open echoed through the space. Suddenly, the sharp sound of glass shattering echoed from the kitchen, accompanied by distant screams outside, the pounding of hurried footsteps, and then an eerie silence fell over the scene. I remained perfectly still in my concealed spot, uncertain whether it was safe to emerge. The operator's voice in my ear sent a chill down my spine. "The police are in the house. You can come out now. Reveal their identity right away." The cabinet door creaked open, each movement a reluctant protest from my weary muscles. I emerged just as a sleek light aircraft glided over the police station, presented to me in complete tactical attire. "Sarah, it seems you're hurt." I shook my head, a wave of dizziness washing over me as the adrenaline started to surge. Fade away? I don't think so. The next hour unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. More officers arrived, firing off questions and searching for fingerprints. I sat on the couch, cocooned in a thermal blanket, doing my best to provide answers. My parents burst in, panic etched on their faces, having finally listened to the voicemails I left them. It was only after the police had left and my parents had stepped back that the true gravity of the situation began to sink in. As I lay in bed, the slightest creak and groan of the house sent shivers down my spine. As I struggled to find sleep, my phone buzzed with a message. It was Lizzie, my best friend, checking in to see if I was all right. She likely noticed the police cars. I began crafting a response, but then I paused. How can I articulate the events that unfolded and the overwhelming urge I felt to push them from my mind entirely? Ultimately, I opted for a straightforward "I am." The next day, we engaged in a conversation that felt far more comfortable than trying to express the sheer terror I experienced in that cabinet, where I truly believed each breath might be my final one. With a gentle motion, I set my phone down on the bedside table, my eyes drifting towards the entertainment center. From this perspective, I could glimpse the edge of the cabinet where I had concealed myself. It seemed unremarkable, just a simple wooden door, yet it had been my lifeline. A chill ran down my spine as the memory of those footsteps drew near, the glint of the knife in the intruder's grip flashing vividly in my mind. What might have unfolded if I hadn't recalled that hiding spot, if time had moved a bit slower, or if he had taken a moment to inspect the cabinet? My thoughts surged with possibilities, each one more chilling than the previous. I understood, on a rational level, that I was now secure. The police had ramped up their patrols in the area, and my father had already reached out to a security company for an alarm system installation, yet reason did little to soothe the anxiety coursing through me. Every shadow appeared menacing, and each sound felt like a potential threat. The realization that someone had invaded our home, traversing spaces we believed were secure, felt like a profound violation that left me grappling with how to comprehend it. I grabbed my phone once more, gliding my finger over my contacts. I was in desperate need of a conversation with someone, anyone, to break the solitude. I heard a warm voice, yet as my finger hovered over Lizzie's name, I hesitated, questioning whether I should weigh her down with my concerns. How can I convey that my feeling of safety was shattered in just one night? Ultimately, I set the phone aside without making a single call. I nestled deeper under the blankets, my gaze locked on the bedroom door. As the first light of dawn began to seep through my window, sleep remained just out of reach, my mind trapped in a relentless replay of the night's events. I made a quiet vow not to let this night define me. I refused to allow fear to dictate my life. I would discover a way to reclaim my sense of safety at home. But for now, in the calm of the morning, I embraced everything that had transpired. I acknowledged the fear, the helplessness, and the sheer luck that had kept me alive. When the tears finally came, I let them flow, releasing the emotions I had been holding inside. Tomorrow, I would be strong. I would respond to the police's inquiries, endure the concerned glances from neighbors, and confront the looming nightmares. But for now, in this fleeting moment between night and day, I simply allowed myself to exist, to feel, to breathe. With each breath, I reminded myself that I survived. I am still here, and whatever comes next, I will face it head-on. As the sun emerged, casting a gentle golden glow across my room, I sensed the initial stirrings of hope. The journey ahead would be lengthy, but I was determined to embark on it. With each passing day and every small step, I gradually transformed my space back into a true home. The headlights of my vintage Chevy pierced the night, casting light on an unending stretch of asphalt that lay ahead. The endless stretch of road was punctuated only by the sporadic glow of the dashboard clock, a constant reminder of how late it had become. In that moment, I spotted him, a solitary figure by the roadside, thumb raised. He materialized from the shadows like a ghostly apparition. My mother always warned me against picking up these clues. It's simply not safe, she insisted with a resolute tone. One can never be certain. As I drew near, I could see the desperation etched in his posture and the way his shoulders sagged, a clear sign of exhaustion and defeat. In this isolated spot, what were the odds of another vehicle coming along before I could talk myself out of it? I was already on the gravel, stirring up a cloud of dust in my wake. The man sprinted toward my car, his face illuminating the scene. I've been here for hours, and as I looked closer, I realized he was older than I initially thought, likely in his 50s or 60s. His face bore the marks of a challenging life, etched with deep wrinkles, yet his eyes shone bright and alert, almost unsettlingly so in the dim light of my car. "Where is he headed?" I inquired, aiming for a laid-back vibe. As a sense of discomfort began to stir in my stomach, he reached for the door handle and mentioned a village about 50 kilometers away. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the lock button. The thought of being stranded here in the middle of the night, watching car after car pass without stopping, made me sigh as I pressed the unlock button. "Go ahead," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm heading in that direction." He slid into the passenger seat, clutching an old worn-out backpack against his chest. As we hit the road, an unpleasant smell wafted through the air, a mix of sweat and something metallic I couldn't quite place. "I'm Jake," I said, more to break the awkward silence than anything else. "Thanks again for stopping." "Not many would today," John replied, his eyes fixed on the road. I mumbled a few words that barely registered, my thoughts racing ahead to the town he had mentioned. 50 kilometers away, roughly a 45-minute drive at his current speed. I could manage to endure that for 45 minutes. We traveled in silence for a stretch, the only sounds being the steady hum of the engine and the occasional creak as John shifted in his seat. He kept casting sidelong glances at me, attempting to unravel the mystery of what unsettled me about him. There was an elusive quality about him that just didn't seem to fit. There was an intriguing quality about him that seemed off. So, what's the reason for his arrival? I finally broke the silence, unable to hold back any longer. John paused for a moment, his voice taking on an unusual, far-off quality as he finally spoke. "I sincerely hope I find it," I managed to articulate in a strained voice that even I could hear. John glanced my way, his eyes shimmering in the shadows. "Oh, I will," he declared, his intensity sending shivers down my spine. "I've been searching for him for ages, but I can feel it. I'm getting closer now, I just know it." I nodded, holding back my response. My grip on the steering wheel was so intense that my knuckles had turned a stark white. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to stop the car, to demand he get out, to distance myself from him. Yet, we were stranded in the middle of nowhere, and fear gripped me at the thought of what he might do if I attempted to abandon him there. I continued my drive, tallying the miles to the village. John fell silent once more, yet I sensed his eyes on me, observing my every action. The air in the car was so thick and oppressive that it left me gasping for breath. He suddenly declared, making me startle in my seat, "You resemble the man I am looking for." My heart raced with intensity. "Indeed," you whisper. "Yes, the identical complexion, the matching hair color." Even the identical model of car came to a halt as he reached into his backpack. Isn't it amusing how fate unfolds? Don't you think every cell in my body was shouting that something was seriously amiss? As I attempted to respond, an unexpected sensation of something cold and solid interrupted my words. My thoughts were in a whirlwind. With a gun pointed at me, I frantically scanned my surroundings for an escape, but my choices were few. With trembling hands, I guided the car to the shoulder and brought it to a gradual stop. "Shut off the engine," he instructed. I complied, every muscle in my body taut with anticipation. Just as I turned the key in the ignition, John swiftly grabbed it from my hand. "We're about to have a conversation," he said in a voice that was calm, perhaps too calm. "It's time for you to share every detail I seek about that night." A decade ago, I found myself staring at him in utter confusion. "Could you provide some clarification on what you mean, Balbu?" The barrel of the gun presses firmly against my side, and I find myself in the dark about it all. "Be honest with me," John erupted, his eyes blazing with fury. "For a decade, I've been searching for you. That night, you stripped away everything I held dear, my wife, my children, my very existence." The truth surged into my consciousness, each breath heavy with its chilling clarity. He thought I was someone entirely different, the very man I had been searching for all these years. "Text," I pleaded, my voice trembling with desperation. "He is mistaken. I'm not the person he believes me to be." "That's absolutely fantastic. What are your capabilities?" He ridiculed you, creating an entirely new version. Identification. I quickly checked my wallet, pulling out my driver's license to demonstrate my integrity. John studied me intently for a long moment. Then, using his free hand, he retrieved my wallet and pulled out my ID, his brow furrowing as he examined it. "This can't be right," he murmured, scrutinizing the license with increased intensity. "Indeed," I maintained. "My name is Jake Thompson. I am 25 years old. Text, I also work at a software company in the city." It all began for him a decade ago. I was not involved in any way. For a fleeting instant, I caught a glimpse of uncertainty on his face. I pondered the chance that I might sway him to reconsider his stance. Yet, his demeanor shifted. He refrained from growling, opting instead to shake his head. My heart dropped. It was impossible to change his mind. I was the one who shattered his world, and no words of mine could alter his perspective. He ordered me to leave the vehicle, his gun aimed straight at me. I pleaded with him to cease, having tried to do so yet again. He had no duty to adhere. He commanded, "Exit the vehicle," his voice chilling as his heart raced. As I swung the door open, I was greeted by the crisp embrace of the cold night air. John kept his gun trained on me as he followed closely behind. "Begin your journey," he instructed, gesturing toward the shadows. As I ventured beyond the familiar asphalt, my first hesitant steps echoed with the weight of unspoken thoughts. I pondered the countless individuals who would remain oblivious to my fate. My parents, friends, and colleagues, all destined to search for answers like John pursuing his elusive foe, or perhaps I would simply fade into the realm of the unknown. As I moved through the shadows, with John hot on my heels, I realized I couldn't foresee how this night would unfold. In that moment, I made a silent vow. If I made it out alive, I would never again ignore my instincts. Never again would I consider picking up a hitchhiker in the distance. The town lights twinkled tantalizingly close yet felt impossibly far away as John urged me further off the road. Those lights began to fade, leaving us enveloped in the vast, indifferent darkness of the night. The old clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep, resonant chimes echoing through the empty house. I jolted awake, heart racing, trying to shake off the remnants of a nightmare I couldn't fully recall. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure of my surroundings, but then clarity returned. I was in the grand Victorian Henderson house, having taken a housekeeper's job that had seemed like an easy way to earn some extra cash. Yet, after 3 days, an unsettling feeling lingered, as if something was amiss in this place. Perhaps it was merely the creaks and moans of an aging house settling or the way the silver wind howled through the eaves on stormy nights. There were moments when I could have sworn I heard footsteps echoing in empty rooms or caught glimpses of shadows flitting just beyond my sight. Shaking my head to dispel the thoughts, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feeling the chill of the wooden floor against my bare feet as I made my way to the bathroom in the guest room. I splashed water on my face, attempting to wash away the creeping unease. Just as I reached for a towel, a soft bang resonated somewhere in the house, causing me to freeze. I held my breath, straining to listen, but only silence met my ears. Then, there it was again, a dull, muffled sound, as if something heavy had toppled over. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered me, of course. I was alone here, or at least I was meant to be. I stepped cautiously out of the bathroom, my eyes scanning the dimly lit room. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting an eerie glow that felt oddly familiar, yet the shadows loomed larger, more threatening. A sudden, louder bang echoed from below, sending my heart racing in my chest. I contemplated calling the police, but what could I possibly say? That I had heard a sound coming from an old house? Instead, I found myself approaching the bedroom door, compelled by an unsettling curiosity. The hallway descended into an all-consuming darkness, a palpable void that eluded any attempt at understanding. I took out my phone, its dim glow guiding me as I descended the stairs. The hallway clock marked the passage of time with its steady, rhythmic tic-tac. Each moment appeared to stretch endlessly in the soft glow. The wooden steps groaned beneath me, each creak echoing in the stillness. In the quiet of the home, as I arrived at the foot of the stairs, the glow of my phone upon entering the great hall, the dim atmosphere enveloped me. To my left lay the inviting living room, while to my right stood the elegant dining room. As I pondered the source of the noise, a subtle rustle in the living room provided the answer, making my heart skip a beat. With bated breath, I cautiously drew nearer. With a quivering hand as I fumbled along the wall in search of the light switch, I finally located it and flipped it on, resulting in a startling bang. In that instant, regret washed over me. The light poured into the room with a nearly decaying quality. Once my eyes acclimated, I found myself regretting what I had witnessed. The room lay in disarray, furniture tossed aside, books and ornaments strewn across the floor, with an eerie emptiness at its heart. Not a single person flinches, utterly convinced that my perception must be flawed. It was as if I had missed something that had undeniably been present just a moment ago. I could have sworn that in that fleeting instant, before my vision fully adapted, I caught a glimpse of a tall, vague figure, more shadow than form. Yet now, the room stood completely vacant. "Hello," I knocked once more, my voice quivering with uncertainty. Silence enveloped the room, with not even the faintest tick of the clock betraying the presence of another soul. I arrived. The silence enveloped me, a chilling presence that both terrified and propelled me forward. As I stepped into the room, the glass beneath my feet creaked, sending a shiver down my spine. As I glanced down, I noticed I had inadvertently stepped on the remnants of a broken photo frame. The shattered glass glimmered ominously in the light. I crouched to retrieve the photo nestled within the frame, and an icy shiver coursed down my spine. It was a picture of the Hendersons, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson alongside their 2 children, all beaming at the camera. Yet, as I gazed at the image, it appeared to ripple. The cheerful faces contorted, the smiles morphed into silent screams, and the eyes plunged into shadowy abysses. I released the photo with a sharp intake of breath, watching it drop to the ground with a muted thud. Upon revisiting the scene, everything appeared as it should. Laughter echoed, and the familiar faces brought a sense of comfort. I rubbed my eyes, questioning whether I was still ensnared in a dream. In that moment, a chilling breath brushed against the back of my neck, causing every muscle in my body to tighten with anticipation. I spun around, yet found only emptiness. The door creaked open, revealing the shadowy corridor that lay ahead. "This isn't funny," I declared, attempting to infuse my voice with a touch of bravery. "If anyone is present, reveal yourself to me." And sadly, it resonated throughout the house. The sound was pristine. The discomfort sent shivers down my spine. I recoiled, stumbling over a toppled table and crashing to the ground. The impact took my breath away for a moment. As I regained my composure and sat up, a chill coursed through me at the sight in the living room. In the dim light, a tall, indistinct figure loomed, appearing more like a shadow than a solid form. I stood still, captivated. The figure was not alone in its motion. He stood there, observing me, or at least that's the impression I had. Though his face was a blur, and I couldn't make out his eyes, I felt a lump in my throat as I managed to whisper, "What are you?" The shadow inclined its head, seemingly examining me for an extended moment. We remained still, and just like that, it disappeared as quickly as it had come into view. The hallway clock chimed once more, marking the hour of 1 in the morning. Just a single hour had slipped by. Each hour stretched on, feeling like an endless eternity. I surrendered to the earth, my heart racing with life. At 1,000 miles an hour, I had no idea it was that particular thing. Uncertainty loomed over me, yet one thing was crystal clear. I was not alone in this house. The presence alongside me had a message to convey, one that would reveal itself from the very first moment I laid eyes on it. I barely gave it a second thought. Just another face blending into the crowd, a new neighbor settling into the house across the street. As the weeks went by, an unsettling feeling lingered, suggesting that something was amiss. Stephen Miller began with the small details, his routine of being outside, tending to his perfectly kept lawn each time he left for work, and his uncanny ability to track my schedule, effortlessly dropping hints about coming home early or questioning whether he would appreciate I couldn't recall ever sharing my routines with her. Initially, I brushed it off as mere kindness, maybe a hint of solitude. After all, Stephen was a newcomer to the neighborhood, and from what I gathered, he was living solo. But then, the gifts started coming. On a Tuesday morning, I discovered the first surprise, a small package, meticulously wrapped, waiting at my door. Inside, I found a delicate silver bracelet, unmistakably luxurious. The card read, "To Jenny from a friend." I was surprised. It wasn't my birthday, and I couldn't imagine anyone sending such a lavish gift without any reason. Later that day, when I brought it up to my best friend Lisa, she playfully suggested that perhaps I had a secret admirer. "Perhaps it's your new neighbor," she teased, "the one you mentioned who seems to be constantly watching you." I chuckled, yet her words lingered in my mind. It could be Stephen, yet I can't help but wonder why our interactions have been limited to mere greetings since her move. The surprises kept coming. A stunning bouquet of my favorite flowers, a clear nod to my love for sunflowers, and a first edition of a book I had casually mentioned wanting to read during a private chat with Lisa on the phone. Every present came with an identical note addressed to Jenny from a friend. I started to feel a sense of discomfort, the focus that initially, it appeared to be a compliment. Now it comes across as an intrusion. I began to observe additional details. The curtains in Stephen's front window would flutter as his car drove by. Occasionally, it was parked a few houses away. After returning home from work, he stepped into his garage just moments after I entered mine. That night, I was jolted awake by a noise outside my window. Peering through the curtains, I spotted a figure crouched behind the bushes in my garden, my heart racing with anticipation. I contacted the authorities, but upon their arrival, they discovered that no one was present. The officer received my statement with a hint of doubt, convinced that I wasn't merely imagining things. "Ma'am, we have not received any reports of intruders in the vicinity." I stood firm on my account of the events, yet it was clear he remained skeptical as the officer departed. Stephen exited his house, worry etched across his face. "Everything okay?" Jenny inquired, sensing the tension. "I heard a commotion." He forced a smile. "Thought I saw something, but it was a false alarm, I guess." Stephen nodded, yet his gaze remained fixed on me. "If you ever need anything, day or night, I'm right across the street." A chill coursed through me. His words, meant to be reassuring, felt more like a veiled threat than a genuine offer of assistance. The following day, I set up a comprehensive security system, installing cameras at every entrance and motion sensors throughout. While I felt a bit more secure, the unsettling sensation of being watched lingered. A week later, I returned home to find the front door slightly open, my heart racing. I immediately contacted the police once more, and this time, Officer Tom Aaron took my concerns seriously. They searched the house but discovered nothing missing. Only one item was disturbingly out of place. A picture of me now adorned the kitchen counter, a place it rarely occupied, as it usually found its home on my bedside table. The officer proposed that perhaps it had fallen and I had inadvertently relocated it without recalling. Yet, deep down, I was aware of the unsettling reality. Someone had entered my home, handled my belongings, and violated my personal space that night. Restless and wide awake, I found myself poring over the security footage for hours on end. Absolutely nothing. At precisely 2:17 a.m., a silhouette he emerged on the screen, sending a chill through my veins as he identified Stephen's unmistakable stride. Approaching my door, he produced what seemed to be a key and stepped inside. A wave of nausea washed over me as I realized how long he had been at this, and the unsettling thought of him having a key to my house lingered in my mind. I observed in disbelief as he navigated my home with the ease of someone who had visited countless times before. The following morning, I headed directly to the police station with the video in hand. I provided my statement and was assured they would look into it, though they cautioned that the process might take some time. In the meantime, they recommended that I spend some time with a friend. I reached out to Lisa, my voice quivering as I detailed the circumstances. He urged me to be with her right away while I hurriedly packed my suitcase. I gazed out the window, yearning for a glimpse of Stephen, but his house stayed quiet, the curtains drawn, just as I was ready to depart. A knock echoed at the door. I peered through the peephole and caught sight of Stephen, his face etched with concern. I felt a deep concern about the breach of my privacy and found myself questioning how long this situation had been unfolding. The police guaranteed that they would enhance patrols in my neighborhood. Yet, I was aware that it wouldn't suffice. Stephen possessed a sharp intellect and an unwavering caution. Time slipped by, transforming days into weeks. I spent the night at Lisa's place, feeling too frightened to return home. The police conducted their investigation, yet lacking solid evidence of a threat, their actions were limited. Sten delivered a flawless performance, embodying the neighbors' confusion and concern. "I don't understand," she expressed to the detectives, her voice laced with sincerity. "Jenny and I are friends. She was just trying to be nice. If I did something to upset her, I wish she would tell me. It's frustrating because I know the truth." Yet, I found myself unable to provide evidence. My world crumbled around me. Home felt unreachable, work became impossible, and sleep was a battleground of nightmares that haunted me relentlessly. I received a message that made my heart race, and I leaped at the chance, hoping it was from Stephen. Then, one night, everything shifted. I woke up to find Lisa poised to call 911, But I halted her. I paused, leaned in, and whispered that I had an idea. It was a gamble, perhaps even reckless, but I was done living in fear. Stephen had a grip on my life. Now, it was time to rewrite the playbook. We switched off every light and concealed ourselves. In just a few moments, the front door creaked open gently. Careful yet recognizable footsteps echoed through the space. The house throbbed with such intensity that I feared it might betray us, but I steeled myself to remain motionless and adhere to the strategy. The bedroom door creaked open, and a beam of light from the lantern danced across the room, revealing the bed where a gasp echoed and hurried footsteps rushed toward it. In that instant, we launched our surprise assault. Lisa flicked on the lights just as I leaped from my concealed spot, pepper spray ready in my grip. Stephen's eyes widened in astonishment, revealing a hint of something darker, a manic delight that sent a shiver down my spine. With a smile blossoming on her face, Jenny leaned in to whisper, "I always believed you would come to see it my way. I knew deep down you shared those feelings too. The sole feeling I encounter is one of revulsion." I inadvertently caught my finger on the spray's trigger. "Stephen, it's clear that you're unwell. Seeking help is essential." His expression soured. "Please refrain from saying that. You're not serious, are you? We are destined to be united. I've been keeping an eye on you, safeguarding your every move. Every action I've taken has been for your sake." He advanced a step in my direction. I instinctively sprayed it in the eyes. Lisa had already arrived within minutes. I found myself speaking with the police. As the sirens drew near, Stephen, still contorted on the ground, started to weep. "All I ever wanted was for you to love me," he lamented. "What was it that kept you from loving me?" As the police stormed into the house, a surge of relief washed over me. It was the conclusion, at last, truly the conclusion. The remainder unfolded in a whirlwind of police reports and courtroom proceedings. Stephen found himself in handcuffs, facing serious allegations of harassment, trespassing, and an extensive array of additional offenses. The evidence we collected that night, along with what the police discovered in her home, was undeniable. Step by step, I started reclaiming my life. I made my way back home. After a lengthy journey to regain my sense of safety, I took decisive action by changing the locks, enhancing my security system, and starting therapy to address the trauma. As I relaxed on my porch during a stunning summer afternoon, I suddenly became aware of something I hadn't noticed in what seemed like ages. I didn't keep a constant watch on my surroundings or respond to every noise. I was simply existing. The marks left by Stephen's actions will forever remain with me. I've become more vigilant, acutely aware of the potential threats that can hide behind seemingly kind faces, yet I will not allow fear to dictate my life. I made it through. I am more powerful than ever. Additionally, I'm available during the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. A smile crept across my face. Stephen attempted to claim me, dominate me, and make me his own. Ultimately, the one person I truly belong to is myself, and that's a truth that no one can ever strip away from me. The piercing ring of my cell phone shattered the stillness of the night, causing me to startle. The clock caught my eye, 11:42 p.m. Typically, I would have let the call slip into voicemail, but an unexpected urge compelled me to pick up. Take a moment to gaze out the window. Jake, greet me, for my blood has turned to ice. How did I come to know my name? How did I figure out my location? I resided solo in a quaint little house on the fringes of town. I was taking care of a friend's house while they were away on a year-long trip. The closest neighbor was nearly half a mile distant. Despite my reservations, I found myself drawn to the window. The curtains were tightly closed, yet a narrow gap revealed the shadowy expanse of the backyard. Absolutely nothing, feeling a blend of relief and confusion, I remarked. I can't see anything, only the moonlit lawn. Examine it more closely, the voice urged. My gaze is fixed on you, Jake. I constantly have my eyes on you." With a dramatic flourish, I released the curtains, and my thoughts began to swirl with a whirlwind of possibilities. A punchline, an unwanted observer, or perhaps I was teetering on the edge of sanity. Moreover, I inhaled deeply and clenched my teeth. With a steady tone, I declared, "I have no idea who you are or what your intentions are, but this is not amusing. I'm ending this call now. If you reach out again, I will have to involve the authorities." The voice chuckled once more, the laugh devoid of humor that sent chills down my spine. Jake called out to them. They wouldn't discover anything, but I'll remain here for eternity. The line went dead. I remained there, the phone pressed to my ear, caught in the echo of the ringtone. My hands trembled as I finally set it down. For the next hour, I meticulously checked and rechecked every door and window in the house, scanning the garden for any sign of movement. Yet there was nothing. No footprints in the damp earth, no rustling branches in the nearby trees. Everything was perfectly in place. Utterly drained, I slipped into a fitful slumber, but my respite was short-lived, as the following night at exactly 11:42 p.m. the phone rang once more. The identical figure. This moment I allowed it to ring until it reached voicemail. A moment later, a notification flashed on my screen. A new voice message, my fingers trembling as I reached to listen. Stress, the relentless voice, reverberated in my mind. "You can't ignore me." "Jake, I'm right here, keeping a close eye." With my heart racing in my chest, I deleted the message and blocked the number. This was unimaginable. It had to be a prank, no doubt, yet the calls persisted night after night, arriving precisely at 11:42 p.m. from a different number each time. At times, I responded. At other moments, I remained silent, yet the voice remained constant. I consistently expressed the same sentiment, always affirming that I recognized myself. I found myself consumed by paranoia. Moreover, I flinched at every shadow, taken aback by any sudden sound. Additionally, I set up security cameras and motion sensor lights. Additionally, I even thought about getting a dog, but the cameras never captured it. No change occurred. The lights remained off, and I understood instinctively that a dog wouldn't provide any relief after enduring a week of this torment. In the end, I reached out to the police, who were sympathetic but ultimately ineffective. The officer stated that without solid proof of a threat, our options were limited, perhaps changing his number or staying with a friend temporarily. But I knew I couldn't walk away. This was my duty. At my friend's house, a stubborn part of me resisted the urge to leave, convinced it was all just a twisted joke. So I remained, even as the calls persisted. On the 10th night, everything transformed. The phone chimed at its customary hour of 11:42 p.m. This time, I responded without delay. "What is it that you seek from me?" I yelled, my voice strained from stress and exhaustion. The pause lingered longer than expected. "It's time to step outside, Jake. Let's connect in person." My blood turned to ice. "I didn't say," I said firmly. "No way, I'm not going to fall for that," the voice laughed. But this time it wasn't just a hollow laugh. There was something else, something excited. "You don't have a choice, Jake. Either you go out or I come in. Believe me, you'll prefer the first option." The line was cut. I stood there frozen in place. Every instinct in my body screamed to lock the doors, call the police, do anything unless I went out. But a tired little part of me just wanted this to end before I could think too much about it. I was already moving towards the front door. My hand was shaking as I turned the knob, opening it slowly. The night was calm. The air was heavy with the promise of rain. I took a step off the porch, my eyes scanning the darkness. "I'm here," I called, hating how weak and scared my tone sounded. "What do you want?" For a moment nothing, and then from the shadows at the edge of the garden something emerged. It was high, inhumanly thin. His movements were erratic, wrong, as if he wasn't used to his own body. When he stepped into the glow of the moonlight, my breath got stuck in my throat. Wasn't human. I couldn't do it. Her limbs were too long. Her head was oddly shaped. Her skin was a sickly gray that absorbed light instead of reflecting it, and where it should have been, her face was just a smooth surface, no features. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do something, but my body refused to respond. I could just stare in horror as the thing approached with movements every time he stopped at the foot of the porch stairs and tilted his head like a curious dog. Then, to my horror, an opening began to form on his empty face, a kind of grotesque mouth that curved into something like a smile. "Hi, Jake," he whispered in that rough voice that had tormented my nights. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." I lived alone in a small house at the end of the night, on the outskirts of town, looking after it for a friend who was traveling abroad for a year. The nearest neighbor was a quarter of a mile away. Against my better judgment, I went to the window. The curtains were closed, but I could see a small fragment of the backyard through an opening. With trembling fingers I opened the curtain a little wider and looked outside. Nothing. Just the empty yard lit by the moon. "I don't see anything," I said with a mixture of relief and confusion. The voice on the phone insisted in an almost mocking tone. "Look closer. I'm watching you, Jake. I'm always watching you." I dropped the curtain and pressed the phone to my ear. "Listen," I said, trying to make my voice sound firm. "I don't know who you are or what you want, but this isn't funny. I'm going to hang up, and if you call back the police—" The voice let out another cold laugh. "Ahead, Jake. Call them. They won't find anything. But I'll still be here, watching. Always watching the line." It was cut. I stood there with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead tone. My hands were shaking. When I finally put the device down, my mind was going 1,000 miles an hour. It was a joke, a stalker, or I was losing my mind. I spent the next hour checking and securing every door and window, peeping through the curtains, looking for any sign of an intruder, but there was nothing. No footprints in the soft earth around the house. No broken branches in the nearby trees. Everything was in place. Finally, tiredness overcame fear, and I fell into a restless sleep, but the relief was short-lived. The next night, at exactly 11:42 p.m., my phone rang, the same number again. This time I let it go to the mailbox. A minute later I received a notification, a new message. With trembling fingers, "Press play. You can't ignore me, Jake," whispered the familiar voice. "I'm still here, following your every move. Sweet dreams." I deleted the message and blocked the number with my heart hammering on my chest. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a joke. True, but the calls continued every night at 11:42 p.m., every time from a different number. Sometimes I answered, sometimes no. The voice always said the same thing, that it could see me, that it was watching me. My paranoia grew. It jumped with every shadow, with every unexpected noise. I installed security cameras, even motion-sensing lights. I thought about getting a dog, but nothing showed up in the recordings. The lights never came on, and deep down I knew that a dog would be of no use. After a week of torment, eventually broke down and called the police. They were understanding, but they couldn't do much without proof of a real threat. Try changing their number, the officer suggested to me, or staying with a friend for a while. But I couldn't leave the house. It was my responsibility, and a stubborn part of me refused to run away. So in theory it could be an elaborate joke. So I stayed, and the calls went on. On the 10th night everything changed. At 11:42 p.m. the phone rang as usual. This time I answered immediately. "What do you want from me?" My voice cracking from lack of sleep and stress. The pause was longer than normal. Then the voice whispered, "Come out, Jake. It's time for us to meet face to face." Panic paralyzed me. I didn't answer firmly. "I'm not going to falling into that." Humorless laughter came back. "You have no choice, Jake. Go outside or come in. Believe me, you prefer the first option." The call it cut off. I stood there, with the phone stuck to my ear. The pulse hammered in my temples. Every instinct told me to barricade myself, to call the police, to do anything except get out. But a tired part of me just wanted this to be over before I could think about it too much. My feet were already moving towards the door. My hands were shaking as I turned the knob and opened it slowly, trying not to make a noise. The night was calm, the air dense with the promise of rain. I took a step onto the porch, eyes scanning the darkness. "I'm here," my voice barely more than a whisper. "What do you want?" For a moment, nothing. Then from the shadows at the end of the courtyard a figure. He emerged, tall, too tall. His movements were clumsy, erratic. When he stepped under the moonlight, my breath got stuck in my throat. He wasn't human. He couldn't do it. His limbs were too long, his head deformed, his skin grayish, absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. And where there should be a face, there was only shadow. My body refused to move. I could only watch paralyzed. As the thing approached, he stopped at the foot of the porch steps, and L nodded his head as if studying. A line opened in his empty face, forming a grotesque imitation of a mouth. Hi, Jake said in the same deep and raspy voice of the phone. How good it is to finally see you in person. My throat was dry. What are you? The creature's mouth curves into something like a smile. I am many things, Jake. A watcher, a guardian, a balancer of scales. What does that mean? I managed to ask, although I barely recognized my voice. The creature tilted its head. It means that you are special. You can perceive what others do not hear, what others ignore. That's why I chose you. My mind turned. Choosing me? Why did the thing take a step further to join us, Jake? To be a watchman like me, to see the world as it really is, not like humans pretend it is. I took a step back. No, I don't want that. I just want you to leave me alone. The creature made a sound, almost a sigh. I'm sorry, Jake, but it's too late. You've seen, and once you see, there's no turning back. His long arms went up to me. I tried to move, run, but my body didn't respond when his cold hands touched my face. A rush of energy, it pierced me suddenly. I saw the world change, brighter colors, deeper shadows, distant whispers in my ear, and a truth vaster and terrifying than I had ever imagined. My old world vanished, a strange and immense new world. It had just begun, and somewhere a phone rang, waiting for someone special to answer. The first drop of rain hit my face like an icy finger. I looked up at the sky, and I let out a bad one, seeing the dense dark clouds rolling over me. This was supposed to be a simple walk in the mountains, a day of hiking to clear my mind and enjoy the solitude. Now, with the light fading and the temperature dropping, I realized my mistake. I had lost my way. I took out my phone, hoping against all logic that there would be a signal in the middle of this secluded place. Nothing. The message of no service was shining mockingly at the top of the screen. The wind started to blow harder, and the rain really fell. I couldn't keep walking aimlessly in the dark. I needed to find shelter. I looked around desperately, looking for anything that could offer me protection from the storm. It was then that I saw it, a flickering light through the trees. It was dim, almost imperceptible through the veil of rain, but I was definitely there. A campsite, another hiker, or with a bit of luck, a ranger station. I hesitated for a moment. To approach a stranger in the middle of the forest was not exactly the safest option, but staying out in the open all night wasn't either. Thunder knocked down in the distance, and that convinced me. I started walking in the direction of the light, pushing the wet branches in my path. As I approached, I realized that it was not a campfire, but the warm electric light of a cabin. Relief flooded me. Whoever lived there would surely understand my situation and let me take refuge until the storm passed. Left the forest and entered a clear rock. The cabin stood in a lent, a structure of rustic logs that I gave birth to. Taken from a pole, thin smoke rose from the chimney, promising and comfort in swayer. I approached the door, and suddenly fou coincida. I must have seen myself soaked, covered in mud and leaves, a complete mess. I tried to shake myself a little before calling the door. I waited for a moment. There was no response. Just as I was going to knock again, I heard the sound of footsteps inside. The door opened slowly. The man who appeared on the threshold was not what I expected. He was older, probably in his 60s, with a thick mane of gray hair and a beard, equally abundant. His eyes, a pale and unsettling blue, scrutinized me with int. "I can help him?" he asked in a deep, raspy voice. I swallowed hard. "Sorry for bothering," I said with a nervous tone. "I got lost in the trail and the storm caught me. I wondered if I could stay here until I pass." The man didn't answer right away. He just stared at me as if assessing every inch of my being. Just as the silence became unbearable, he felt slowly. "You'd better go in," he said. "You can't stay outside in this weather." Relief ran through me. "Thank you. I appreciate it very much." I walked in, and he closed the door behind me. The cabin was small but cozy. The fire crackled in a huge stone fireplace. The walls were covered with shelves full of books and strange artifacts, objects that looked like they were from an old museum. "The bathroom is over there," said the man, pointing to a door at the back. "You can dry yourself. I'll get some dry clothes for you." I nodded and went to the bathroom. While I was drying off, I couldn't help but feel that there was something strange about that hut. Maybe it was the atmosphere or the collection of ancient objects scattered everywhere, but the air felt dense, loaded with something I couldn't define. When I came out, I found the man sitting by the fire with 2 cups of steaming tea on a small table. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the chair in front of him. "This will help you warm up." I took a seat and wrapped my hands around the cup. The liquid was dark and had an earthy aroma. "I am Jack, by the way," I said, trying to break the ice. The man nodded as I drank a sip of the tea. It was strong, with a taste I couldn't identify, but comforting. So Jack, said Esra after a moment of silence. What brings you to these woods? I shrugged. I just wanted to clear my mind. It's been a tough year. I thought a little outdoors would help. Esra nodded as if he perfectly understood nature. He can be a good teacher, he said, but he can also be dangerous if not respected. There was something in his tone that put me on alert. What does that mean? He squinted and studied me carefully. Tell me, Jack said in a low voice, how much do you know about the history of these forests? I shrugged my shoulders. Not much, the truth is, he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile full of secrets. These forests are ancient, he said, older than you can imagine. His voice leaned forward just a whisper, and they have their own guardians. I swallowed hard. Guardians? Esra nodded. Beings that have been here long before us, creatures that watch the balance. The atmosphere in the cabin seemed to get heavier. I felt the need to move, to do anything to dispel the feeling of unease that was invading me. Esra got up suddenly and went to one of the shelves. She took out a thick, aged leather book. Here, he said, extending yellow to me. This will help you understand. I took the book with trembling hands. Had no title, only a symbol on the cover. A tree whose branches enveloped a crescent moon. What is this? Esra smiled again. That same enigmatic smile. The story of these forests. I opened the book. The pages were yellowed with time, full of dense writing and strange drawings. As I read the world around me, it seemed to fade. The words described rituals, ancient creatures hidden in the shadows, men who they had gone into the woods and come back, changed. The fire craped louder, the storm roared outside. I looked up from the book and saw that she was looking at me intensely. You understand now? She asked. I swallowed. I didn't know if I want to understand it. She leaned forward with her eyes shining with something she couldn't identify. Well, you'd better decide soon, Jack whispered. Because now that you know the truth, they know it too. A thunder rumbled outside, lights flickering, and in that moment I knew my life would never be the same again. The rhythmic pounding of rain against the tent canvas was strangely comforting, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had fallen over our camp. I curled up in my sleeping bag, trying to shake myself off the chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Something was wrong. It felt it in my bones, in the way the forest around us had become unnatural, silent. This was supposed to be a fun weekend camping trip, just me and 5 of my closest friends from college, a chance to relax before final exams, to reconnect with nature and each other. But from the moment we arrived at this secluded place in the deep Ozark, everything felt strange. At first it was little things, objects disappearing from our backpacks only to appear in strange places, whispers in the woods that didn't quite look human, and then there were the crude, ancient symbols etched into the trees around our campsite. We laughed, attributing them to previous campers, but now in the dead of night they looked much more sinister. I looked at my watch. 11:58. From in 2 minutes it would be Sarah's turn to stand guard. I should wake her up, but something kept me clinging to my sleeping bag, a sense of dread, a certainty that something was about to happen. The rain suddenly ceased, leaving behind it an oppressive silence. Even the usual sounds of the night, the hooting of an owl, the rustling of small animals moving through the undergrowth, were gone. As if the whole world was holding its breath. 12:02. I should wake up now, but when I reached out to shake her shoulder, a sound froze me in place. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching our tent. My heart hammered into my chest as I stood motionless, barely daring outside. A shadow was cast on the tent canvas, huge and misshapen. I was definitely not human for a long and scary moment. Nothing happened. Then a voice spoke, low, rough, with a strange accent that I couldn't identify. Come out, go out wherever you are. We know that you are there, little ones. They repressed this. It couldn't be happening. It had to be a joke, right? Maybe the boys from the nearby camp trying to scare, but deep down I knew this was real and we were in serious danger. I pushed Sarah to wake her up, pressing a finger to my lips when he started to speak. His eyes snapped open at the sight of my terrified expression. Then he looked at the shadow, at a motionless outside the store. What do we do? He muttered. Without making a sound, I shook my head. Without an answer, tied up here, with no way to warn the others who were sleeping in the other 2 nearby stores, and whoever or whatever was outside clearly knew we were here. The voice came back, but this time I wasn't alone. Now other voices joined her, speaking in an unknown language, harsh and guttural, and then, to my horror, I heard an unmistakable sound, the slow glide of a clasp opening. They were opening our tent. At that instant the survival instinct took hold of me. I grabbed Sarah's hand and threw myself to the other side of the tent, tearing the thin canvas with my free hand. We went out, rolling into the cold night, and we stood up immediately. What I saw almost stopped my heart. Our camp. It was surrounded by tall, impossibly slender figures with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to change and distort in the moonlight. They moved with unnatural grace, gliding more than walking on the forest floor. One of them turned his face towards us, and his mouth stretched into a smile that it was too wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Run!" I screamed with all my miser. Everyone run! The camp erupted into chaos. My friends came out of their tents confused and terrified. The creatures, or whatever they were, moved with impossible speed, blocking our escape routes. We scattered, crashing in pursuit, but I didn't dare to look back. Sarah still had my hand, her breath ragged at the same pace as mine while we ran for our lives. The forest seemed to come alive around us, branches that stretched out to trap us, roots that rose from the ground to trip us. It was as if the earth itself was working with our pursuers. We ran what seemed like hours, the sounds of chase, never letting go. Saying, my lungs burned, my legs screamed in pain, but terror kept me moving. Finally I emerged in a small clearing in the center of it was towering a ruined stone structure, some kind of tomb or mausoleum. Without thinking we ran towards it. The heavy stone door reach-in opened. When we pushed with all our might we slipped inside and slammed it behind us in total darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to examine the inside. It was small, empty except for a huge stone sarcophagus in the center. Similar ancient symbols, the ones we had seen carved into the trees, covered the walls. "What the hell is going on?" jade Sarah, dropping to the ground. "What were those things?" I shook my head, still trying to catch my breath. "I don't know. I've never seen something like that." A horrible thought crossed my mind. The others asked in a low voice. Sarah closed her eyes tightly. Her face twitched. "I don't know. I heard screams, but I didn't see." The pain of the uncertainty pierced me. We were the only ones left. Then Sarah grabbed my arm tightly. "Listen." I held my breath. "Music. Forcing you." It was pure solid stone, no windows, just a single door, the chant getting louder. I felt the vibrations in my bones. Sarah and I pressed against the wall as far from the door as we could, and then it stopped. Silence. Boom. Something hit the door with terrifying force. Boom. The old one's runes on the walls began to glow. The sarcophagus in the center, he moved. We looked breathlessly. What we had done. Boom. The door shook and dust fell from the ceiling. I wouldn't resist much longer. "The runes," whispered Sarah, pointing to the walls, "are shining." She was right. The symbols emitted a faint blue glow, getting more intense with each knock on the door. Boom. A crack appeared in the stone. In despair I looked around and looking for something, anything that could help us. My eyes fell on the sarcophagus. "Help me with this," I said to Sarah, running towards the stone tomb. Together we pushed the heavy lid with all our might. At first it didn't move. Boom. Another crack in the door. There was no time. "Please murmur, we need help," as if my words had activated something. The runes on the walls shone brighter, and the lid, the sarcophagus, began to glide slowly with a deep, shuddering crack. Sarah and I took a step back when something inside the door moved. Finally the cold moonlight entered the tomb, revealing dark figures on the threshold. The beings that had pursued us were there, but instead of entering, they stopped. The air was charged with an indescribable energy. Something ancient and powerful had awakened from the tomb. Emerged a tall, towering figure shrouded in the same blue glow as the runes, its eyes burning like stars as the beings tried to move forward. The guardian raised a hand and uttered a single word, a primitive, colossal sound that could not have been produced by a human throat. The attackers screamed "No!" in terror. A sudden flash cut through the air, followed by an eerie stillness. As my sight came back, the entities had vanished, the door remained unscathed, and the guardian was facing us. "Can you tell me about yourself?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The being observed us for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I am the Protector." His voice resonated deeply, as if it emerged from the very core of the earth. "This location has been sealed off for centuries." He kept the shadows at bay, but you stirred him from his slumber. Sarah and I exchanged glances, a wave of guilt washing over us as if he were our guardian. With a weighty heart, I softly conveyed that our friends had made it through. The guardian's demeanor shifted to one of shadow. The guardian's, a muffled sound from upstairs, sent a chill down my spine. My hand hovering over the TV remote. It was past midnight, and I was alone in the house, or at least that's what I thought. Ethan and Lily had tucked the children in hours ago. with their parents not expected to return until the following morning. Then what had that noise made? I silenced the television, pricking up my ears in the sudden stillness for a long moment. Nothing. Just as I was starting to convince myself that I had imagined it, I heard it again, a sharp bang followed by what sounded like scratches. My heart started pounding. It was surely nothing. I told myself, old houses make strange noises all the time, but a persistent voice in my mind wouldn't leave me alone. And if someone had entered, and if the children were in danger? I swallowed hard and got up from the couch. I should check just to be sure. As I made my way up the stairs, my eyes fell on the block of kitchen knives. After hesitating for a moment, I grabbed the bigger one, better to be safe than sorry. Truth, the floor creaked under my feet as I rose, each sound seeming absurdly loud in the stillness of the house. I stopped at the top, listening to the sound of scratches was now clearer. I definitely came from attic. First I checked the children, poking their heads into their rooms. Both slept deeply oblivious to the fear that I was consumed ally, but still restless. I turned my attention to the attic door at the end of the hall. As I got closer, the scratches intensified. My palms were sweating, causing the handle of the knife to slip into my grip. What was I doing? Should I call the police instead of facing a would-be intruder armed only with a kitchen knife and my fear? And if it was just a raccoon trapped, I would feel calling 911 because of that. Plus I couldn't leave the kids alone while I waited outside for the police. I took a deep breath and turned the attic door knob. It wasn't locked like I had hoped. I slowly pushed the door open. The hinges creaked ominously as the darkness of the attic unfolded before me. Scratches stopped in the silence. I could hear my own rapid breathing ringing in my ears. Hello, I called with a trembling voice. There's someone there. No answer, only the oppressive silence of the old house. I looked for the light switch and turned it on. A bare light bulb flickered, casting long shadows on the messy attic space. Stacked boxes and old furniture created a maze of possible hiding places. I clenched the knife harder, advancing slowly. Each step the wood felt ether, CRI under my weight. When I reached the top of the stairs, the air filled with a smell of dust and old wood. Miso scanned the attic, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing seemed out of place, but then I saw it. I clenched the knife tighter, moving slowly. Each step felt eternal. The wood creaked under my weight. As I reached the top of the stairs, the air filled with a smell of dust and old wood. My eyes scanned the attic, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing seemed out of place, but then I saw it. A faint flicker of movement in the far corner of the attic. I turned sharply with the knife raised, my heart pounding in my ribs. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Among the piles of boxes and old furniture, something was moving. A shadow. If there's anyone here, get out right now, I said, sounding firm. Silence was my only response. The air in the attic felt dense, charged with an unsettling electricity. My breathing became shallow as slowly the boxes began to move. No, it wasn't a person coming out from behind them. It was something else. The figure emerged with clumsy movements, as if articulated by invisible threads. Her body seemed to be made of cardboard, a cage of boxes held together with tape adhesive, and on his face, or where his face should be, there was a drawing on marker. 2 eye circles and a crooked mouth in an unsettling smile. My blood froze. This couldn't be happening. A step back, tripping over a box. The knife slipped from my fingers and fell to the ground with a dry noise. I didn't murmur, feeling dizzy. This isn't real. The creature tilted its head as if studied me. Real enough, whispered, his voice coming from everywhere, and none at once enough to be alone. My breathing became erratic. What are you? The cardboard being. He moved. His limbs creaked with the sound of paper folded. I don't know he said anything else before now, just this. The dull sound from upstairs made me freeze, with my hand floating over the TV remote. It was past midnight, and she was alone in the house, or at least she was supposed to be. The children she was babysitting, Ethan and Lily, had been put to bed hours before. Their parents wouldn't be back until the next morning. Then what had that noise made? I silenced the television. Agus listened in the sudden stillness for a long moment. Nothing. Just as I was beginning to convince myself that I had imagined it, I heard it again, a sharp thud, followed by what sounded like scratches. My heart started pounding. It was surely nothing. It was nothing to myself. Old houses make strange noises all the time. But a persistent voice in my mind wouldn't leave me alone. And if anyone had broken in, and if the kids were in danger, I swallowed hard and got up from the couch. I should check just to be safe. As I made my way to the stairs, my eyes fell on the knife block in the kitchen. After hesitating for a moment, I grabbed the biggest. Better safe than sorry. The ground creaked under my feet as it rose, each sound seeming absurdly loud in the stillness of the house. I stopped at the top, listening to the sound of scratches was now clearer. It was definitely coming from the first I checked, the children poking their heads into there. Both of them slept soundly, oblivious to the fear that consumed me. Relieved but still restless, I turned my attention to the attic door at the end of the hallway. As I got closer, the scratches intensified. My palms were sweating, causing the handle of the knife to slip into my grip. What was I doing? I should call the police instead of facing a would-be intruder, armed only with a kitchen knife and my fear, and if I was just a raccoon caught, I'd feel ridiculous calling 911 for that. Plus, I couldn't leave the kids alone while I waited outside for the police. I took a deep breath and turned the attic door knob. Wasn't locked like I'd expected. I slowly pushed the door open. Hinges creaked ominously as the darkness of the attic unfolded before me. Scratches stopped in the silence. I could hear my own rapid breathing ringing in my ears. "Hello," I called in a trembling voice. "There's someone there." No answer, only the oppressive silence of the old house. I looked for the light switch and turned it on. A bare light bulb flickered, casting long shadows on the messy space of latex stacked boxes and old furniture, created a maze of possible hiding places. I squeezed the knife harder, advancing slowly. Each step felt eternal. The wood creaked under me as I reached the top of the stairs, the air filled with the smell of dust and old wood. My eyes scanned the attic for any sign of movement. Nothing seemed out of place, but then I saw it. I clenched the knife harder, moving slowly. Each step felt eternal. The wood creaked under my weight. As I reached the top of the stairs, the air filled with the smell of dust and old wood. My eyes scanned the attic for any sign of movement. Nothing seemed out of place, but then I saw it, a slight eyelid of movement in the far corner of the attic. I turned sharply with the knife raised, my heart pounding in my ribs. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Among the piles of boxes and old furniture, something was moving, a shadow. "If there's anyone here, get out right now," I said, trying to sound firm. Silence was my only response. The air in the attic felt dense, charged with unsettling electricity. My breathing became shallow, as slowly the boxes began to move. It wasn't a person coming out from behind them. It was something else. The figure emerged with clumsy movements, as if articulated by invisible threads. Its body seemed to be made of cardboard, a collage of boxes held together with duct tape, and on his face, or where his face should be, there was a drawing on marker, 2 circles for the eyes and a mouth twisted in a disturbing smile. My blood froze. This couldn't be happening. A step back, tripping over a box. The knife slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor with a thud. "Don't murmur if I studied real. Enough," he whispered, his voice coming from everywhere and from none at once. "Enough to be alone." My breathing became erratic. "What are you?" The cardboard being he moved. His limbs creaked with the sound of paper folded. "I don't know," he said. "Anything else before now?" "Only this." The old Polaroid camera felt heavy in my hands. Its worn surface was cold against my skin. I had found it hidden in a dusty corner from my grandmother's attic, a vestige of an era passed by an impulse. I decided to take her with me on my lonely walk through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. Little did I know that this innocent piece of obsolete technology would become the lens through which to glimpse a world beyond ours. The day had begun like any other hiking trip. I left early. The morning fog still clung to the ancient trees as I made my way along the winding path. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and small animals. The air permeated with the scent of the pine and damp earth. Was the perfect day for photography, and I found myself taking photos of everything that caught my eye. A particularly twisted tree trunk, a patch of vibrating mushrooms, a ray of sunshine breaking through the canopy. It wasn't until I got to a small, of course, things took a turn into the unexplainable. As I picked up the camera to capture the scene in front of me, I noticed something strange in the viewfinder. A tall and incredibly thin figure was at the far end of the clearing, remained motionless. Its form seemed to merge with the shadows of the trees. I blinked and lowered the camera. The clearing was empty, just as it had been a moment before. Confused, I raised the camera again. There was the figure, clear as day in the viewfinder, but invisible to the naked eye. My heart began to beat hard. What I was seeing, was it a malfunction of the old camera, some kind of double exposure, or I was glimpsing something that existed just beyond the veil of our reality? With trembling fingers I pressed the shutter button. The camera buzzed and clicked, spitting out a small square of film. I waved it in the air, waiting impatiently for the image to develop while the chemists did their work. The image slowly appeared, the clearing, just like I had seen him, but with a chilling additional detail. The figure was there, his elongated limbs and his featureless face sent a shiver down my spine. I looked up from the photo and examined the clearing again. Only trees and undergrowth, no trace of the otherworldly being I had captured on film. Curiosity overcame fear. I raised the camera again. Slowly walking through the forest with the viewfinder through, he saw them more. Figures, some hidden behind trees, others standing in plain sight. They were everywhere, a hidden world teeming with invisible life. For the next hour, I captured as much as possible through my lens, each shot unveiling a deeper glimpse into this concealed world. Beings that eluded definition, formations that appeared to inhabit the unthinkable gaps among the trees, and even what looked like entrances to realms that were nowhere to be found. I could begin to imagine when the sun began to descend on the horizon. I realized that I had strayed too far from the trail. The forest around me was unknown, darker and more primitive than the area where I had started. The panic began to take hold of me when I realized that I was lost. It was then that I heard it. A soft melodic hum coming from somewhere nearby was beautiful, hypnotic, different from any sound I had heard before. Without thinking, I began to move towards him, attracted by his mysterious call. I pushed through a dense patch of ferns and found myself in another clearing. In the center was a circle of stone monoliths, each covered with strange swirling symbols that seemed to move when I didn't look directly at them. And there in the center of the circle was the buzzing fountain. It was one of the creatures that I had been photographing, but this one was different. It was larger, its shape more defined. As I watched it turn to me, I felt its gaze over me. Although it had no visible eyes, I raised the camera instinctively, my finger hovering over the shutter button. The creature tilted its head, a hauntingly human gesture. Then, to my amazement, it spoke to us. "You see it?" Its voice echoed in my mind, instead of in my ears. "You have pierced the veil." I found my voice, though it came out barely, like a whisper. "What are you?" The shape of the creature trembled like the heat rising from the hot pavement. "We're the ones in between," he said. "Neither here nor there. We exist in the spaces between your reality and others." My mind was spinning, struggling to process what I was hearing. "Why can I see you now? Why couldn't the creature before?" Gesture to the camera. "The device you're holding, it's ancient, from a time when the boundaries between worlds were thinner. It gives you a glimpse of our realm." I looked at the Polaroid and then back to the creature. "They're dangerous." A sound like the wind through the leaves filled my mind. I realized it was laughter. "No more dangerous than your own kind," replied. "We've existed alongside you for eons, invisible and unaltered. But now you've seen us." A shiver ran down my spine, and that changes things. The creature's shape began to blur. "The veil has been pierced." Her voice growing dimmer. "The boundaries will weaken. What was hidden will soon be seen by everyone." "Wait!" I screamed, but it was too late. The creature disappeared along with the stone circle. I found myself standing in an ordinary clearing, with no trace of the encounter I had just experienced, but I had proof, the pile of Polaroids in my hand, each showing a glimpse of a world beyond our own. As I returned to the trail, guided by some instinct I couldn't explain, I knew that my life had changed irrevocably. In the days and weeks that followed, I examined the photographs, studying every detail, researched mythology and folklore, finding echoes of the ones in between in stories of cultures around the world. I tried to return to that one. Absolutely, but it eluded me thereafter. The Polaroid camera sits on my desk, a perpetual reminder of the revelations I encountered that day in the woods. On those tranquil nights, I find myself reaching for it, scanning the shadows of my room. Occasionally, I catch a fleeting glimpse of movement just at the periphery of my vision. The elegant mahogany pendulum clock in the hall chimed as the clock struck midnight. Deep bells echoing through the cavernous halls of Blackwood Manor. I stopped at my work, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the heat in the studio. Midnight, the witching hour, as my grandmother used to say, the hour when the veil between the worlds thins. I shook my head in rebuke of my own superstition. I was here to do a job as the new manager of the Blackwood State. My responsibility was cataloging and organizing the vast collection of artifacts and curiosities gathered by generations of the eccentric Blackwood family. Was tedious but fascinating work. Each object seemed to have a story. Ancient treasures, tribal masks with hollow eyes that seemed to follow me around the room, intricate mechanical devices whose purpose I could not comprehend, But what really captured my attention were the 13 doors distributed throughout the mansion, each unique one ornamented with symbols and scenes that seemed to change when I looked at them from different angles, and each one inexplicably closed. Of course I asked about it when the family lawyer arrived. A wiry-faced man named Hobbs was frustrant, lazy. They are family heirlooms. I didn't need to worry about them. I tried to open them. I looked for keys. I tried hidden mechanisms. I even tried to pick the locks. I wasn't proud of it. Nothing worked. The doors refused to yield until tonight the last chime of the clock faded, and then I heard it a click, then another and another, 13 clicks one after the other echoing through the empty house. My heart hammers as I took the nearest lamp and stepped out into the hallway. The air felt different, charged with an inexplicable energy. I approached the first door, an imposing oak wood carved with vines and flowers that seemed to sway with a non-existent wind. Trembling, I spread out the hand, the knob swirled under my fingers, the door opened with a soft creak, and beyond it, the impossibility. Instead of the dusty warehouse I expected, I found myself staring at a vast moonlit garden, the flowers shining with a light of their own, their petals glowing with impossible colors. The air was heavy with their intoxicating perfume. I stepped inside, my mind struggling to accept what I saw. This I couldn't reel. The door led to the center of the mansion. There couldn't be a garden here, but the cool grass under my feet said otherwise. Something moved among the flowers, not someone, a slender, graceful figure dancing in complete silence. Then more figures emerged joining the dance. They were beautiful, but in a way that made my skin crawl, and then I realized they didn't have faces, just one smooth skin surface where their eyes and mouths should have been. I recoiled from fear, taking hold of me. The figures stopped, and they all turned towards me. I ran, threw myself back through the door and slammed it shut. My back hit the wood as I gasped, trying to catch my breath. It couldn't be real. I had to have imagined it. But when I looked down, I saw glowing petals stuck to my shoes. Curiosity and terror pushed me towards the next door. This was a deep black carved with scenes of stormy seas and meandering shapes lurking in the depths. I hesitated and then turned the knob. A blow of salty air whipped my face when the door opened. I was on the deck of a ship, an ancient and creaking ship bobbing in a raging ocean. Cold rain whipped my skin as I clung to the railing looking the dark sea, and then I saw it. Something gigantic emerged from the depths, a colossal silhouette curling up into the sky, an eye as big as the ship itself, shining with an impossible light, staring at me. The weight of its gaze crushed me. It wasn't human. It wasn't of this world. It was something more ancient, something that had been here before us and would be here for a long time. Then the eye flickered in that fraction. After a second of darkness, I threw myself backwards through the door. A tentacle crashed right where I had been standing. I closed the door with a bang, collapsing open 12 more to discover each one revealed a different world. A desert of purple sand where crystal spirals sang melancholy songs under a sky of 3 moons, a forest of flesh throbbing where trees pulsed with a sickly pulse and fruits wept tears of blood as they were torn away, a city of impossible geometry where gravity seemed to shift in every street and furtive shadows were hoisted between buildings that defied all logic. Each door dragged me farther from sanity until only one remained. The 13th was distinct, small, of a pale wood color with a simple brass knob. My hand I was shaking as I turned it. The door opened and it was my study, the same room I had been working in, but upside down like a reflection in a mirror, and there sitting at my desk was me, my other self. He looked up and gave me a sad smile. I was waiting for you. Terror immobilized me. What is this? What's going on? He sighed, leaving his pen on the table. It's the end of the journey and the beginning. My throat dried up. Who are you? I'm the one he came before. He gestured me to the chair in front of him. I hesitated and sat down. The Blackwoods weren't just collectors, he said. They were guardians. My other self looked at me seriously. The doors are in your hands. Now a contract appeared in front of me. A pen in my hand, 2 options. Run, forget, or sign and become the new guardian. With a lump in my throat, I signed and knew that my life should never be the same. Mommy, you can see my friend. Emma's question made my skin crawl. I turned to look where my 5-year-old daughter was pointing, but I only saw the empty corner of her room decorated in pastel shades. What a friend, darling? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Emma let out one as if I would have said something silly to Mr. Whispers of Course he's right there greeting you. I forced a smile, but my heart and strongly. Emma had mentioned her friend before, but this was the first time she insisted that he was physically in the room with us. Oh, I see, I lied, making a wave towards the empty corner. Hello, Mr. Whispers. Emma smiled satisfied, because she had recognized him while he was tucking her in the bed. I couldn't get rid of the unsettling feeling that settled in my stomach. It all started a month ago, shortly after we moved to this old Victorian house. Emma had always had an active imagination, so at first I didn't think much about her new friend. It was normal for children her age to invent imaginary companions, true, but over time her stories about Mr. Whispers became more detailed and more disturbing according to her. He was very tall, much taller than Dad, with long, thin fingers and eyes that glowed in the dark. He only went out at night. He told me and knew all the secrets of the house. I tried to rationalize. We had moved to a new place. Emma was adapting. But when I kissed her on the forehead and turned off the light that night, I couldn't help but feel that something was wrong at 2 o'clock. In the early hours, a noise stirred me from sleep. Initially, I assumed it was merely the house adjusting itself. It was old after all, and creaked frequently. But then I heard it again. A soft but insistent rhythmic tapping came from Emma's room. Fear made me hesitate, but I forced myself out of bed. The hallway seemed longer than normal, the deeper shadows. The tapping continued to increase in intensity as I approached. I took a breath and turned the doorknob. Emma was sitting on the bed with her eyes wide open, shining in the dim light of her night lamp. She was smiling, but it wasn't her usual smile. It was different. It tasted too much. "Hello, Mommy," she said with a disturbing calm. "Mr. Whispers said you would come." I turned on the room light suddenly. Emma blinked at the sudden clarity, but her expression did not change. "Emma, baby," I tried to keep my voice steady. "What are you doing awake?" She gave her head as if she were listening to something. "Mr. Whispers says you're scared, but you shouldn't. It's good." The air in the room felt heavier. My eyes swept around the room looking for something, although I didn't know what. "Where Mr. Whispers is now?" I asked with a lump in my throat. Emma pointed to the closet. "There. He likes the dark." I looked, the closet door ajar. Just a few inches. A thread of absolute darkness spilled from inside. Every fiber of my being screamed not to open it, but something inside me, a mixture of fear and defiance, made me move forward. "Mr. Whispers," I said, feeling ridiculous, "if you're real, show yourself." The silence spread, and then the door creaked and opened a little more. A chill went up my spine. I said, "One step back." And I took Emma's hand. "We're going to sleep in Mom's room tonight." "Yes." Emma didn't resist. She just smiled and said, "He knew you'd say that." The next day I tried to act like it was all a coincidence, but strange things started to happen. The lights were flashing for no reason. The doors were closing by themselves. The baby monitor cameras were picking up shadows moving in Emma's room when I slept, and every night I found her door ajar even though I closed it. Before going to bed, Emma kept talking about Mr. Whispers, who told her stories, who whispered secret about the house, that I saw her even when she slept, and one night I heard it. I woke up suddenly with a strange feeling, as if someone was in the room. I held my breath, listening to a low and harsh whisper echoed from the baby monitor in my nightstand. "Hello, Mommy." I froze. My voice wasn't Emma's. It was deeper, older. With trembling hands, I looked at the monitor screen. Emma slept peacefully in her bed, but next to her, in the darkness of the wide-open closet, something moved. I threw myself out of bed and ran to her room. I turned on the light, the heart hammering on my chest. Emma was still asleep, the closet empty, but the door was open wider than I'd ever seen it. I slammed, my breathing shaky. Emma stirred on the bed and muttered in her sleep, "Good night, Mr. Whispers." That was the night I decided we would leave. It didn't matter if it sounded irrational. I wouldn't stay to find out what Mr. Whispers was. I spent the night packing. But when morning came, Emma looked at me sadly. "Mommy, she doesn't want us to leave." I shuddered. "Baby, we have to go." Emma shook her head, her expression suddenly much older than it should have been. "She says it's part of the house. It always has been." I swallowed hard. "Since when do you know that?" She blinked as if she was surprised by the air is stuck in my lungs. I didn't wait any longer. We left that same afternoon. I didn't look back while I was loading Emma into the car. I didn't look at the house. Before closing the car door, it was a whisper that only I could hear. "We will see each other again, Mommy." I don't know if Mr. Whispers was real, or if it was just the imagination of an overly perceptive girl, but I know this: I will never go back into that house, and I will never leave a door of the closet open again. I hung up, my fingers still clinging to the phone, when a sound chilled my blood. Scratches. Something was scratching the door. I wasn't sure how many were out there, but they knew where it was. I looked around looking for something to defend myself with. A fire extinguisher, grabbed it tightly and waited. The minutes felt like hours. The chair blocking the door started to slowly slide back. They were pushing. Every muscle in my body was tense, waiting for the inevitable moment when they would get in. Then a sound, Salvador sirens. The mannequins began to bang on the door in desperation. They knew they didn't have much time left, and then the barrier gave. The door slammed open and they entered. A wave of inhuman bodies, smooth faces and empty expressions advanced towards me. I raised the fire extinguisher ready to fight, but instead of calmly they stopped, separated into two rows, forming a path, and through that corridor of plastic bodies came someone else. Me, or at least something that looked exactly like me. Every feature was identical, the same clothes, the same scar on my chin, the same eyes. But there was no life in his gaze. "What are you?" you murmured. My double smiled. "It's you," he replied in my own voice, the improved version. My mind was spinning in a spiral. They weren't just coming to life, they were replacing us. "We've been watching you. I continue to learn from you. Now it's our turn." My body was filled with a cold, paralyzing terror. How many more people had been replaced? How many living mannequins were now walking among humans? Why, I managed to ask. My double shook his head with an almost curious gesture. "Every species evolves. Yours has had its time. Now it's our turn to thrive." The footsteps of the officers echoed in the store. But then I realized something even worse. What they would see when they arrived. A frantic woman in a fire extinguisher and another identical woman, calm, confident with my face and voice, who they would believe had no time to think. I threw myself at my double and hit with all my might, but she was faster than me. She caught my wrist in the air with a force inhuman. "You don't need to fight," she whispered. "This will be easier if you cooperate." I never lifted my knee and hit her in the stomach. To my surprise, she doubled over in pain. "They can feel." I used her moment of weakness to push her and run out of the room. Just as I was turning the corner, I collided head-on with the policeman here. I screamed. "They are the mannequins are alive." But before they could react, my double appeared behind me with a calm and worried expression, said exactly what I feared. "Thank God they are here." Officers froze. I was acting like I was the intruder. This woman burst into the store. She continued. "My double, I found her in the warehouse screaming about live mannequins. I think she might be drugged. I don't chill. She's the imposter. It's me, the real one." The cops exchanged a look. One of them turned to my double. "She has me ID." Heart sank. I saw how he took a wallet out of his pocket and handed them a document. My face, my name, my address was my identity. "We're going to need both of you to accompany us to the station to clear this up." No, I didn't try to fight. I tried to explain. "But how do you prove you're real when there's an exact copy of you right in front of the others?" They won. Handcuffed me and escorted me out of the store. I looked one last time at my double, smile, waved me goodbye as if I already knew the battle was lost. I spent the night in a terrified cell with only one thought on my mind: how many more are out there? When I was released, my boss came to pick me up. He looked frustrated. "I don't know what game you're playing," he muttered, "but if it's this, it happens again, you're fired." I didn't answer. As I drove back to the I saw her, my double, walking towards the entrance as if nothing had happened. Our eyes met. She smiled. She raised her hand again in a greeting. My skin stood on end. I could have left. I could have tried to forget, but I knew the truth. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. I got out of the car with shaky legs, looking towards the store. The mannequins were still there, waiting for me. The invasion had already started, and I was the only one I knew. The first time I saw the numbers, I thought I was losing my mind. They appeared out of nowhere, floating in the air above people's heads like some kind of stranger, personalized hello, at first blinking hard, rubbing my eyes, trying my best to make them disappear. But they persisted, shining dimly in my vision, no matter what I did. It all started on a Tuesday morning that I should have. I was in my usual routine, squeezed into a crowded subway car, when I noticed a faint blue glow over the head of the woman standing next to me. As I focused on it, the glow took shape and turned into a number 43. I stared at him, puzzled, wondering if perhaps he had had too much coffee that morning. Then I saw another number floating above a businessman engrossed in his phone, 78, and another about a bright blue-haired teenager, 16. I soon realized that everyone in the subway car had a number floating above their head. Everyone except me got off at my stop completely dazed. With my mind spinning as I walked the 2 blocks to my office, I saw numbers everywhere. Some were single digits. Others stretched into the hundreds. They also varied in color. Most were a faint blue, but some were green, yellow, even a deep, ominous red. By the time I got to my desk, I was convinced I was having some sort of mental breakdown. I considered calling my boss and asking for the day off, maybe scheduling an emergency appointment with a psychiatrist, but as I watched the office, seeing the numbers floating above my co-workers' heads, a strange sense of calm it settled in me. If this was a hallucination, it was the most reliable and clear presentation I had ever encountered. I chose to tackle it from the perspective of a data analyst I once was. I began documenting the figures I encountered, along with insights regarding the individuals associated with them. Initially, I overlooked any discernible patterns. The numbers appeared to be random, lacking any correlation to age, gender, or other observable factors. However, as time passed, I started to observe something unusual. The numbers were not fixed, they evolved. With a mix of anticipation and concern, I observed my boss's number decline from 89 to 88, sometimes at a surprisingly swift pace. In just 1 week, my cubicle mate made a remarkable leap from 32 to 45 overnight. Approximately 2 weeks after the numbers first emerged, I finally grasped the concept. I understood. I was having lunch with my best friend Sarah, looking at her number 62 while she was talking to me about her recent breakup. Her voice was bitter and angry while talking about her ex. I saw her number drop to 61. Then when she changed the subject and started telling me about a new hobby she had taken, her number went back up to 62. That's when I realized the numbers weren't random at all. They measured something that increased when people were happy or satisfied and decreased when they were sad or stagnant. Was like an indicator of life satisfaction. I wasn't sure of the exact metric, but I was sure I was right. Armed with this new understanding, I began to see the world differently. I noticed patterns that I had never perceived before. The homeless man on the corner who always had a kind word for passers-by. His number was a constant 72, louder than many of the well-dressed professionals who hurried past him. The barista at my regular coffee shop, who was always smiling brightly, had a 23, which told a very different story than his radiant expression. I became obsessed with watching him. The numbers, trying to figure out what made them go up and down. I saw numbers plummet during breakouts and soared after him. Workplace promotions. I witnessed a woman score soar from 40 to 65 after a stranger assisted her with her fallen groceries. Yet this kindness carried a significant burden. How can I leverage this knowledge effectively? Should I intervene when I notice someone's number dropping to a concerning level? My role was to assist individuals in boosting their figures. The solution revealed itself to me roughly a month after the numbers emerged. It was late at night, and I was walking home when I saw a young man sitting on a park bench. His number was red, 3rd, the shortest I'd ever seen. Something about his posture, the defeated way he hunches his shoulders, set off all the alarms in my mind. Before I could think twice, I walked up to him. "Hello," I said, trying to sound casual. "You're fine." He looked up surprised. "Yes, I'm fine." I sat next to him, ignoring all the social norms that said I shouldn't disturb strangers in parks at night. "Sure, it looks like you might be having a bad time." There was a long silence, and I saw his number blink between 2 and 3. Then suddenly he started talking. He told me about the loss of his job, his growing debts, his feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness as he spoke. I looked at his number with my heart in a fist, afraid that it would drop to 1 or even 0, although I had no idea what that would mean. But something incredible happened as he spoke, while I was listening and saying how little comfort and advice he could. His number started to go up slowly at first, then faster when he finished speaking. It was at 15, still low but no longer an alarming red. "Thank you," he said as he got up to leave. "I don't know why, but I feel better, like maybe things weren't so desperate as I thought." I saw him move away, his stable number at 15, and I felt a mix of relief and amazement. I had made a small difference perhaps, but real. Since that night I made it my mission to help. Whenever I could. Sometimes I intervened directly. Other times, a simple act of kindness was enough. Buy coffee for the person behind me in line, offering a sincere compliment to a coworker, volunteering at a local shelter. Every time, I would see the numbers go up, even if it was just a point or two. But it wasn't always easy. There were times when, despite my best efforts, the numbers kept falling. I watched helplessly as my aunt's number dwindled as she battled cancer, ending up in a Pacific. See, before I passed away, I saw relationships fall apart, dreams break up, and the impact this had on people, and I was always assailed by the same question: why I was the only one who could see these numbers. Was a gift, a curse? Some kind of cosmic mistake. I had no answers. Just a growing sense of responsibility. As the months went by, I noticed that something else was changing. I became more empathetic, more attentive to the people around me. I began to recognize the signs of a number even without seeing it: a forced smile, a hunched posture, a muffled tone of voice. I became a better listener, a more understanding friend, a more committed member of my community. My relationships deepened, my career flourished thanks to my growing emotional intelligence. I felt fuller than I had ever been. It was almost a year later from the first appearance of numbers, when I saw something that took my breath away. I saw myself in a mirror, and for the first time I saw my own number, UG9th, a strong and stable blue. At that moment I understood numbers did not appear to drive me crazy or to carry an unbearable weight. They appeared to teach me something about empathy, about the impact we have on others, about the importance of human connection. I still see the numbers. I still do what I can to help people elevate theirs. But now I do it with the understanding that we are all connected. We are all part of this large, complex system of human interactions. Every kind word, every moment of genuine connection has an effect that we can't always see, but that is real. I don't know if the numbers will ever disappear or if I will meet someone more than I can see them, but I know this: even if it faded away tomorrow, I would still live my life the same way, because now I understand the truth that numbers always tried to show me. We all have the power to affect the well-being of others for better or worse. Every interaction, no matter how small, has the potential to increase or decrease someone's invisible number, and in the end it is not what we are doing. Life is not solely about pursuing our own happiness. It's about nurturing joy and fulfillment in the lives of others. Keep in mind that your next conversation could be the moment you alter someone's life path. The sharp sound of shattered glass jolted me awake, my heart racing to my throat. In that fleeting moment, I remained still in the shadows, ears attuned to catch any sound. The familiar crackle of footsteps on glass echoed through my living room once more. I reside solo. My home is my private sanctuary. I fumbled for my phone on the bedside table, my thoughts racing. Contact law enforcement immediately. What if I was just embellishing the truth? Perhaps it was the neighbor's cat once more. I would feel foolish if I dialed 911 for a cat, took a deep breath, and swung my legs off the bed. The wooden floor let out a soft creak beneath my feet, causing me to come to an abrupt halt. If anyone was feeling low, I already knew I was awake, grabbed the baseball bat I had leaning against my dresser, a vestige of my college days that I had never saved. Now I was grateful for my procrastination. With the bat tightly fastened, I advanced to my bedroom door. The hallway was dark, too dark. I turned on my phone's flashlight, its faint glow illuminating the path at the top of the stairs. Another sound, a creak, but this time it was coming from the living room. My hands were sweating around the bat. It was definitely not a cat. I could lock myself in my room and call the police. That would be logical, but this, it was my house. I wasn't going to snuggle up while someone invaded it. Step by step I went downstairs. Every creak of wood sounded like thunder in the silence. When I got to the last step, I saw it. A ray of moonlight lit up the living room floor. It came from the broken window. Little shards of glass glistened on the carpet, and there made of the room a silhouette. My heart was booming so loud that I was surprised I hadn't woken up the whole neighborhood. The figure was with his back to me, examining something on my bookshelf. I opened my mouth to yell at him to get out, but my voice jammed in my throat. My hand tightened around the bat. The intruder turned his head slightly as if he had felt my presence. I didn't think about it. I attacked the bat, whistled in the air, and crashed into his head. A dull sound, a gasp in pain. The intruder collapsed on the floor, putting a hand to his bloody head. My breathing was a whirlwind as he groped the light switch. When the room lit up, my mind froze. It was a woman dressed entirely in black, a backpack lying next to her, blood running from a wound on her forehead. Please, gasp. I can explain. I froze. The bat still raised. This wasn't how I imagined a robbery. The thieves didn't ask for explanations. You have a minute, I said, my voice surprisingly firm, before I called the police. The woman struggled to sit up, her face twitching with pain. My name is Sarah. I'm here to rob you. She took a deep breath before continuing. I'm here because you're in danger. In danger? What the hell are you talking about? Sarah gritted her teeth, pointing to the bookshelf. Not me. There's, they repeated, the people who are watching you. A shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to shout at her that I was crazy. But then her words awakened a disturbing memory. The things moved in my house when I was sure I had left them somewhere else. The stranger tingled the back of my neck when I walked home, feeling myself watched. The shadows that I sometimes thought I saw out of the corner of my eye. Number can't be true. But what if it was? How do you know that? I asked with a dry mouth. Sarah looked at me gravely. Because I went through this too. The Watchers, that was the name given to them, a secret organization. They observed, studied, and when they had gathered enough information about someone disappearing. I sank on the couch, feeling the world fall apart. Why don't I know? She admitted. But if they are watching you, there is no turning back. She bowed carefully, and he took something out of his backpack. Strange. Turned it on, and the screen emitted a soft hum. This detects his surveillance technology. He slowly turned the device around the room. When it pointed at my TV, the device beeped. Here, he said, my TV. That TV that I had had for years. That TV that had been spying on me. There is more. Your phone, your computer, maybe even your car. My stomach churned. They had been watching me all this time. What do we do now? I asked in a trembling voice. Sarah stared at me. We leave now before they come for you. We leave. So simple to leave everything behind. But what choice did I have? I got up shaking. Give me 5 minutes. I wrapped my life in a backpack, cash, a few changes of clothes. I said goodbye to my house with my eyes. Maybe I would never come back. Sarah was already at the door, leaning against the wall, breathing hard. Ready? She asked. I nodded. We went out into the cold night. As we music asked. Sarah pressed her lips to a place where they can't find you. We walked into the darkness, and deep down I knew my old life was over. Now all that was left was to run. The security camera recording played on a loop, and each repetition sent me a new wave of chills. There I was, closing the office at 11:23 p.m., briefcase in hand, clearly the last one to leave. Then at exactly midnight, the lights flickering when they came back, I knew. Every desk in the open-plan office was occupied. Dozens of figures hunched over the computers typed furiously. Their faces were blurred, indistinct, but their movements were unmistakably human. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if the lack of sleep was making me hallucinate. But no, the recording was still anyway. At 12:07 in the morning, the lights flickered again, and the office was empty again. There was no sign that anyone had been there. Should I call someone about this? The hesitant voice of our IT technician, Dave, broke my trance. I shook my head, still staring at the screen. No, let's not keep going. I just witnessed. I'm the night manager of Pinnacle Insurance for 5 years in all that. At the time, the strangest thing I had encountered was some drunk employee trying to get back to retrieve a forgotten phone. But this was something completely different. The rational part of my brain tried to find explanations, a glitch in the system, an elaborate joke, but deep down I knew that something truly inexplicable had happened in my office the night before. And I had a terrible feeling that it would not be an isolated event that night. Instead of to go home after my shift, I decided to stay. I told my wife that I had a big project to end up, ignoring the worry in her voice. As the clock approached midnight, I positioned myself in the security room with my eyes fixed on the monitors. 11:58, 11:59. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. Midnight came. The lights flashed just as in, and then my jaw dropped. The office that had been empty was now full of people. But these weren't my colleagues of the day. These figures were translucent. Their blurred, fluctuating edges moved with unsettling purpose, typing into computers I knew were turned off, scrambling files that should have been locked up, fighting every instinct that screamed at me to run away. I walked out of the security room. The sound from the keyboards filled the air, accompanied by a low, constant murmur that I couldn't understand. None of the figures seemed to notice my presence as I walked cautiously through the office. When I got closer, I realized that I could see through them. To the desks behind ghost workers, I thought hysterically, I'm seeing ghost workers. One of them suddenly turned to me, and I stifled a scream where I should have been. His face was a blur, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze was locked onto me. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. Then, with deliberate grace, a delicate hand emerged, inviting me to draw nearer. My feet seemed to have a mind of their own, drawing me nearer. A spectral silhouette gestured towards the glowing computer screen. To my astonishment, I witnessed text scrolling across it, a series of code or data that eluded my comprehension. "What is this?" I whispered, not really expecting an answer. To my surprise, a voice answered, no, not in the air, but directly in my mind. "We work," it said simply, "as we have always worked, as we always will." But why did I ask with a trembling voice? Who are you? The hazy head of the figure bowed slightly. We are what remains, the echoes of the dedication of lives given to work. We go on a long time, after our physical forms are gone. I looked around the office, really seeing it for the first time how many people had worked here over the years, how many had poured their lives into these desks, into these computers. The thought was both amazing and terribly sad. I can help them, I asked, not knowing what else to say. The figure seemed to consider it for a moment. You see us? Finally, that is unexpected. Maybe you can help if there is a mistake that we can't solve. Pointed to the screen again. This time I could make out what looked like a client file. The name at the top, it said Emily Larson. This said the ghostly voice in my mind. Her claim was mistakenly denied. We've tried to correct it night after night, but we can't interact enough with the physical world to make the change. I looked at the file with my mind on whirlwind. This was real. I was asking for a ghost to correct an insurance claim. But as I analyzed the file I realized that she recognized the name. Emily Larson had been in the news recently. A young mother dying of cancer whose insurer had denied coverage for an experimental treatment. The story had been heartbreaking, but it wasn't my department. I hadn't paid much attention to it. With trembling hands I sat down at the computer more close and turned it on. The ghost workers stopped typing, watching me. I felt the weight of their expectations, their hope. It took me almost an hour to find Emily Larson's file on our system. The ghost was right. There had been a mistake. A simple administrative failure that had led to an unfair denial. With a few keystrokes I could correct it. I hesitated for a moment. This was not in the protocol, could get me into serious trouble for access and modify files outside of my jurisdiction. But then I thought of Emily and her family, in these restless spirits working eternally to correct a mistake. I made the change. As soon as I pressed save, a collective sigh seemed to run through the office. The ghost workers began to fade away, becoming more transparent with each second. The figure who had spoken to me turned to me one last time. Thank you, said her mental voice was full of relief and gratitude. Now we can undo. And then they disappeared. The office was empty and in silence once again. I sat for a long time staring at the screen where Emily Larson's updated file glowed softly. When I finally left the office that morning, the world seemed different to me, somehow brighter but also more mysterious. I never saw ghost workers again after that one. Not the security footage. Always they showed an empty office, but sometimes when I work late I swear I can hear the faint sound of keys typing, the low murmur of voices beyond my hearing, and every once in a while I stumble upon a file that just doesn't seem right. When that happens I think of Emily Larson, of the ghost workers who couldn't rest until a mistake was corrected, and I do what I can to fix it. I never told her to no one what I saw that night. Who would believe me? But it changed me, changed how I see my work and my life, because now I know that our work goes on a long time. After we were gone, the mannequin turned his head to look at me, his empty eyes piercing my soul. I stayed to straighten, feeling the cold run down my spine as I realized that I was no longer alone in the department store. After the closing, what I had dismissed as the product of too many sleepless nights was becoming a terrifying reality. It all started innocently. I had taken the night shift at Marlowe, a luxury department store in the city center, to help pay for college. The job was simple: replenish shelves, organize displays, and make sure everything was ready for the next day. The quiet of the night shift suited me. It allowed me to study or just get lost in my thoughts while working. But 3 weeks after I started, things started to get weird. First they were small details, objects that I was sure I had placed in one place, looking like in another, mannequins that seemed to be in slightly different poses than I remembered them. I convinced myself that it was my imagination, that fatigue was playing tricks on me. Then came the noises, whispers that seemed to be rising from empty halls, the sound of footsteps. When I knew I was alone, I began to dread my turns, but I needed the money too much to quit that night. While organizing a new exhibition in the women's clothing section, I heard a faint mechanical hum, as if gears were turning. I immediately turned, my heart beating in my throat, and then I saw it, one of the mannequins, a featureless white plastic model, slowly moving his head to look at me. My breathing stopped. We stood there looking at each other. Then, with clumsy, unnatural gestures, he took a step towards me. I ran. The sheer panic drove me through the store, knocking over shelves and throwing coat racks on the floor behind me. I could hear the dry tapping of plastic against the tiles, the squeaks of joints that weren't made to move. The mannequins were chasing me. I arrived to the staff room. I slammed the door shut and blocked it with a Chair shaking, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Help, Jade. I'm in the Marlowe department store. The mannequins are alive. They're following me. There was a silence on the line. Miss, she's under the influence of some substance. I didn't scream. I know what it sounds like, but I swear it's real. Please send someone. It's okay. Stay on the line. A patrol car is on its way. I hung up the phone, my breath ragged, and then I heard the scratch on the door. The mannequins had found me. I looked desperately around the room, looking for something to defend myself. My eyes locked on a fire extinguisher in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The minutes passed slowly, each marked by the insistent banging and scratching on the door. The chair began to shift. The door frame groaned under pressure as they forced their way in. Just as the wood started to splinter, the sound of sirens pierced the air, and a wave of relief washed over me. I was saved. But that relief was fleeting. The knocks on the door grew louder. The frame rattled violently. Suddenly, the mannequins burst into the room, Illa among them, their limbs rigid and faces devoid of emotion. I raised the fire extinguisher, prepared to defend myself with every ounce of strength I had. But then they halted. They didn't attack. They didn't reach for me. Instead, they parted, creating a corridor, and through that corridor, someone else emerged. It was me, or at least a version of me, identical in every detail, from the small scar on my chin to the trembling of my hands, gripped by sheer terror. The only distinction was the cold, expressionless eyes, reminiscent of a mannequin's. My double smiled at me. Evolution, humanity had its moment. Now it's our turn. Before I could react, I heard footsteps. The officers were inside the store. I had to do something fast. If not, my double was going to go out and take my life without anyone noticing. I threw myself into she with the fire extinguisher, but she was faster. She pulled my arm with impossible force, her grip like steel. "Don't resist," she whispered. "It will be easier." Just like hell, I lifted my knee and hit her in the stomach. She bent over, letting go of her the opportunity, and I shot out of the staff room. I ran straight to the officers. "Here, it's me. Help." But then I heard my own voice behind me. "Officers, thank you. Oh my God, they're here." I turned around and saw my stunt double approaching calmly with a perfect expression of relief on her face. This woman burst into the store. She pointed at me. I don't know what she's saying, but I think she's drugged. The officers exchanged glances. One of them looked at my double. "We're going to need to see some identification." My heart sank. My bag with my ID. I was still in the staff room. But of course, my double possessed an exact replica of my wallet. When the officers scrutinized it and cast suspicious glances my way, I understood I had lost. One of the agents produced a pair of handcuffs and said, "Miss, I need you to accompany us." I glanced at her one last time. She smiled and waved, fully aware that I had triumphed, and I realized the world would remain oblivious to the shift. The invasion had already commenced, and I was the sole witness. I froze, a chill creeping down my spine as I recognized that I was no longer alone in the department store after the lockdown. What I had previously dismissed as mere imagination, exhaustion from countless late nights, had morphed into a chilling reality, accompanied by stiff and awkward movements. The mannequin started its descent from the platform, and a wave of panic washed over me. I sprinted, my footsteps reverberating through the desolate aisles as I hurried onward. I was making my way through the store, knocking down shelves and sending clothes to the floor, but I wasn't alone. I could hear the dry, artificial sound of multiple pairs of plastic feet hitting the floor behind me, mannequins following me. I reached the employee room and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut and pushing a chair against the knob. My breathing was erratic. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, and I dialed 911. "What's your emergency? Help, Jade. I'm in Marlowe. The mannequins are moving. They're chasing me." There was a pause on the line. "Miss, could repeat that. The mannequins are moving. Are you under the influence of some substance?" I didn't scream. "They have a life of their own. Send someone." The operator sighed. "It's okay, miss. We'll send an officer to check the situation. Stay in a safe place." The lights of the street flickering as I turned the corner onto my street, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I squeezed El Paso, holding on tighter to my purse I had gotten later than planned at the library, and the drive home always felt longer in the dark. It was then that I first noticed it, just a flash in my peripheral vision, a figure in a dark sweatshirt half a block behind. I told myself I shouldn't panic. It was probably just someone else coming home just like me. But something about the way he moved in that determined and steady way made me shudder. I sped up, El Paso, feeling my heart start beating faster. The sound of my boots echoing in the silent street, I forced myself not to look back, focusing on the intersection ahead, just 3 more blocks to my apartment. When I got to the corner, I couldn't resist and took a quick look over my shoulder. My breath got stuck in my throat. The hooded figure was closer now, about 6 meters behind me, was definitely following me. Panic took over me. I broke into a run. I didn't care anymore to look paranoid. The heavy footsteps behind. I too rushed. My mind was working at full speed, screaming, trying to stop a car. My apartment was so close, but I would be on time. With shaky fingers, I pulled out my phone, almost dropping it in the process. Just as I was about to dial 911, a voice sounded behind me, and wait, even though every instinct was screaming at me to keep running, I stopped in track. That voice. I slowly turned, my finger still on the emergency call button. The hooded man approached with his hands raised in a gesture. Pacific. When he was close enough, he pushed his hood back, revealing a familiar face. Mike, his breath gasping from effort and fear. What the hell? Mike, my second-floor neighbor, looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, he said, scratching the back of his neck. I saw you coming, and I tried to catch up with you. I wanted to give you back the book I was giving you. He extended a paperback book, the very one I had lent him just last week. I grasped it with trembling fingers, making an effort to steady my breath. You had me racing through the night, all for a book? I inquired with disbelief. Mike offered a hesitant smile. Indeed, it seems that may not have been the most prudent choice. I didn't realize what it looked like until you started running. I let out a nervous laugh, feeling how the adrenaline began to grow. Slow down, okay? Next time, wait until we're in the building. Done? He promised, then hesitated. I can accompany you the rest of the way. I promise to stay at a safe distance. Furthermore, I hesitated for a moment but nodded. Despite the fright he'd given me, I knew Mike for years had been harmless, just a little socially awkward. We walked the last few blocks to our building, talking awkwardly about the book he had just returned to me. I still couldn't shake off the feeling of how quickly fear had taken hold of me. How in a matter of seconds a simple walk home had turned into a moment of pure terror. But even as I tried to calm down, a voice in my head insisted that I had done the right thing, because next time I might not be a well-meaning neighbor following me in the dark. When we arrived at the building, I said goodnight to Mike, and I walked into my apartment with my hands still shaking. As I turned the key in the lock, I went upstairs and reminded myself to thank my mom for the self-defense classes she insisted on as a teenager. I hadn't needed them tonight, but the confidence they gave me probably kept me from falling apart completely. Once inside, I leaned against the locked door and let out a long sigh. The fear was fading, replaced by a wave of relief. It was fine. It had just been a misunderstanding. But as I prepared for sleep, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had changed, that the world had become a little more dangerous, that the dark corners hid more than I was willing to admit. The next few days passed in a fog of hypervigilance. I couldn't help but constantly look over the shoulder, overjumping with sudden noises. I changed my route back home. I bought some pepper spray. My friends noticed my nervousness, but I avoided explaining why. How could I, when I wasn't even sure what it was that terrified me so much? It was a week after the night with Mike, when things looked really disturbing. I was coming home from the supermarket with my arms full of bags when I felt it again, that twinge in the back of my head, the feeling of being watched. I looked around sneakily, trying not to look paranoid. The streets were busy with the nightly grind of the city. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet there it was across the street, half a block behind me, a hooded figure walking at my same pace. My heart began to hammer hard. Number couldn't be. I had to make sure. I accelerated the steps slightly. The figure did the same. Panic rose up my throat. I couldn't go home. I couldn't carry a would-be stalker to my door. On an impulse, I turned abruptly towards a small convenience store and hid in the aisles. Looking through the window, the hooded figure passed by. Didn't stop. He didn't look towards the store. I kept waiting, counting the minutes until I was sure he was gone. I forced myself to calm down. It was just a coincidence. He let out a trembling sigh and hurried out of the store to my building. It was when I reached the door that I saw him. A small piece of paper folded and tucked into the frame. With trembling fingers I opened it. The letters were written with a firm stroke in black ink. I see you. A shiver ran down my spine. Number, it wasn't a coincidence. Someone was following me. Someone wanted me to know. I ran inside my apartment, slamming the door shut and securing all the locks. My breathing was erratic as I tried to convince myself that this wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it was just a joke, perhaps, but deep down I knew this was real. And I was just beginning. The pungent smell of burnt rubber invaded my nostrils as I maneuvered my old Corolla towards the shoulder of the deserted road. A plume of steam rose from under the hood, a clear indication that my car had reached the end of its useful life at the worst possible time. I slumped against the steering wheel with a frustrated sigh. Of all the places it could break down, it had to be here in the middle of nowhere, with no cell signal, with the night fast approaching. I got out of the car feeling the blow of the sweltering heat. Even though the sun was setting, the road stretched out before me like an endless ribbon of asphalt, vibrating with the accumulated heat of the day. Not a single vehicle was visible in either direction. I opened the hood more instinctively than anything else. The mess of wires and hoses under the hood made no sense to me, sighed resignedly, and pulled out my phone again. Nothing. I had no signal. Of course I was going to throw the phone. Back at the car in frustration, when I saw something in the distance, a car was approaching. My heart jumped for salvation. I stood on the side of the road, raising my arms and waving my hands, hoping the driver would take pity on me. The vehicle, an old family van, slowed down for a moment, but when it passed by I saw the driver, a middle-aged woman with a tense expression on her face. She didn't even look at me. She sped up and disappeared into the horizon. "Come on!" I screamed into the empty air. Frustration and anxiety fought inside me. The sun was already touching the horizon, and soon it would be completely dark. I started walking back and forth, trying a plan. I couldn't just start walking without knowing where I wasn't amused by the idea of sleeping in the car either, but there didn't seem to be many alternatives. Then another light appeared in the distance, another car, my last chance. This time I stopped in the middle of the lane, forcing the driver to stop. The vehicle, an old pickup truck, slowed down and stopped about 20 m from me. The driver got out. It was a tall and thin man with his hair between cano and a trimmed beard. He approached. Calmly, with his hands in the pockets of his worn jeans problems, he asked in a deep voice. I nodded, feeling a little silly for having been so dramatic in stopping him. "Yes, my car broke down. I don't have a signal. I could use his phone." The man took out his mobile. He looked at the screen and shook his head. "There is no coverage around here." He looked over my shoulder at my smoking car. "I can take a clear look at it," I said, shrugging, "but I doubt I can fix it." He smiled slightly. "I've worked with engines all my life. You don't lose anything if I try." He leaned over the engine, touching some parts with expert hands. After a few minutes he straightened up and wiped his hands on the jeans. "Good news and bad news," he said. "Give me the bad ones first." "There's no way you can drive this without a serious repair," I sighed. "And the good ones, there is a town about 50 kilometers away. I can take you there. There is a good mechanic who can fix it in the morning." Every instinct inside me told me that I should not get into a stranger's car, but what other option did the man have to notice my hesitation? Because he raised his hands in a gesture of calm. "Look, I understand. It's not ideal, but I can't leave you here alone in the middle of nothingness." I bit my lip. There was something in his expression, in his voice, that told me he was someone to be trusted. Besides, I didn't have many alternatives. "It's okay," I said at the end. "Thank you from nothing," he said with a slight nod. "I'm Ray. By the way, Sarah." I locked the car and grabbed my backpack before following him to the van. When I got into the passenger seat, I felt a twinge of unease. Something inside me was telling me that this was not a good idea, but it was too late to change my mind. Ray started the vehicle and we drove away down the dark road. The conversation was sparse as I drove. After a while, my eyelids began to feel heavy. The rattle of the engine and the warmth of the interior of the truck made me sleepy. I didn't realize that I had fallen asleep until I felt someone gently shake my shoulder. Sarah woke up, blink, and I looked around. The truck was no longer on the road. We were on a dirt road surrounded by darkness. Fear ran through me like lightning. "Where are we?" I asked, my broken voice. Ray smiled, but his expression was different, more predatory. We almost got to where he didn't respond. Instead, he turned off the engine and slowly turned towards me. The air in the van became oppressive. My breathing quickened before I could react. A couple of lights suddenly flashed, illuminating the dirt road. King cursed quietly. I looked out the window and saw another vehicle approaching. It was the same car that had passed me before. The woman who was driving it came out holding a shotgun. "King," she said in a firm voice. "Stay away from the girl." King raised her hands. "Marta, this is none of your business." "Of course it is," she replied. "I've been following you for months, and this time you're not going to get away with it." I was paralyzed. "What's going on?" I asked in a trembling voice. Martha looked at me. "Get out of the car. Darling, you're not safe with him." No, I hesitated. I opened the door and got out of the truck as fast as I could. Marta growled, "King, you ruin all the fun." "Fun for you," she replied, gritting her teeth for the others. Hell, Martha took me by the arm and led me to her car. When I got in, relief hit me like a wave as we drove away. She stirred at the thought of what could have happened to me. Marta sighed. "I'm sorry, girl. I should have stopped before." I couldn't answer. I just nodded, trembling. I had been about to become another unsolved story. But thanks to Marta I was alive and would never trust a stranger on the road again.